Okay, good evening. I see we have somebody here already, Mary. I love it when people come early. We're just going to be a few more minutes before we get started. As you can see, we're just setting this up. So just bear with us for a moment. You can scroll down to the bottom of your screen and click on the button called chat. There you can put in your questions. I'll mention that probably a couple of times over the next few minutes as we wait for people to join. But if you would test it out by, I see there's a couple other people joining in now. So those of you that are joining us now, we're obviously going to wait until 7:30 Eastern Time to start. So if you could scroll down to the bottom of your screen and click on the button marked chat, and type in there where it is that you're from, and that'll just give us an indication of where everybody is dialing in from today. We have quite a number of people signed up for the webinar from all across Canada, so I'm quite excited. I'm not going to list everybody off. Stephanie, welcome from Toronto. Donna from Edmonton. And I'm not going to rhyme everybody off, or otherwise we'll take up the whole webinar just saying where everybody's from. So as I say, just bear with us for the next 6 minutes and then we'll start right at 7:30 Eastern Time on the dot. So welcome everyone to our Wheel and Anchor webinar about the Atlantic coast of Spain and Portugal. So all of those, as you attend, as I mentioned at the beginning, please scroll down to the bottom of your screen, click on chat, and tell us where you're dialing in from today, just so I have a bit of a sense of where everybody is coming to us from this evening. So yeah, we've got quite a number of people on so far. I see Steve from Mississauga, Judy from Concord. This is great. Mary from Chatham. Yeah, terrific. Welcome everybody. We're gonna have a lot of people on the webinar this evening, which is great. Very excited to tell you all about the Atlantic coast of Spain and Portugal. And we're going to be recording this webinar as well, so you'll get a copy of it in your email box sometime after the webinar is complete. So anybody that isn't able to make it, regardless, as long as you signed up for the webinar, you'll get a copy of it in case there's any information that you want to refer to. So 7:25 Eastern Time, we got 5 minutes to go, so just bear with us. Go and grab a coffee or maybe a glass of wine, if that's appropriate at this time. Yeah, and we've got people steadily joining us. Yeah, even from out west, that's great. Mark from Vancouver. Still afternoon out in Vancouver. And I think a little bit warmer than here in Toronto. Actually, I must admit, I'm not in Toronto, but that's... I'm also dialing in from afar. All right. 3 more minutes to go. So for those of you who just joined us, if you could just test out the webinar functionality. The only one that's really important is if you scroll with your mouse to the menu bar at the bottom of the screen, there's a button marked chat. And if you haven't done so already, if you want to click on that and then just type in where it is that you're joining the webinar from tonight, where in Canada that you're joining from, then it just gives me a bit of a sense of who's here and where everybody's coming from. So. And in just over 2 minutes, we will get started. Excellent. Lots more joining in. Yeah, really, we've got coast to coast tonight. We had the Mark there from Vancouver, and now we've got Don from New Brunswick. That's fantastic. Yeah, lots of people from Ontario, as usual. It looks like there's a couple from Manitoba. We've got the whole country represented tonight. In 2 minutes, as I mentioned, we'll get started on our Wheel and Anchor webinar about the Atlantic coast of Spain and Portugal. Okay, so we've got 1 minute to go, so I'll just request one more time for those of you who've just joined, if you could please scroll down to the bottom of the screen and click on the button marked chat, and then you can type in a message to me, and if you could just indicate where it is that you're dialing in from, then I just get a sense of who is here this evening for our webinar. It's also the place, if you have a question at all that pops into your mind during the webinar. So everybody's on mute. And so if you do have a question and you type it in there, then what I'll do is at the end, I've got a Q&A section and I'll address all the questions at one time at the end. So if you can bear with me with any questions, but that's the way to pose them. And we've got less than a minute to go, and then we will get started. All right, so the clock has just hit 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or I guess it's Eastern Daylight Time if I'm if I'm not mistaken. So just one more time, welcome to the webinar, Wheel and Anchor webinar, Atlantic coast of Spain and Portugal. My name is Gordon Drager, the founder, and I am here to present to you tonight some interesting information about this program as well as about these countries. So if you've just joined us, again, one last time, please scroll down to the bottom of your screen, click on the button marked chat, and if you have a question at all, you can type it in there, and at the end of the presentation, the end of the webinar, I will address all the questions all at one time. So without further ado, let's carry on to the program. And I'll start off by introducing our team. So who's joining with me tonight? So again, my name's Gordon. You may recognize me from one of the video newsletters that comes out each week. Also on the webinar this evening is Cassandra McKinnon. She's our Senior Member Services Specialist. If you've called in to the office before, you've probably spoken with Cassandra, that or Veronica. She's not with us on the call this evening. And my right-hand man and our technical support for this evening to make sure that nothing goes wrong, Joel Curry. So what's going to happen this evening is this webinar is really about you. It's about travelers who are interested in what these countries, Spain and Portugal in particular, the coast of the Atlantic coast, are all about. And my job here is to be your guide, just as I will be the host of this tour. And I'm your fellow explorer, because each trip that I go on, I'm also exploring new things together with our members. And the subject of our exploration today, of course, Spain and Portugal, where we'll be heading in September of this year. And so let's go through the itinerary, starting off, first of all, the program begins on September the 29th, where we'll depart from Canada. And of course, we have flight connections from pretty much any city in Canada. So no matter where you're coming from, we can get you to Europe, to our starting point. And on that note, we'll look at the map, which will give you an overview of where we're going. So you can see here, we're going to start at the top in Santiago de Compostela itself, and I'll tell you a little bit more about all these as we go through the webinar this evening. we're going to make our way all the way south to Porto, followed by Lisbon, and then ending up in the Algarve in the far south of Portugal. So once we fly across the Atlantic, we'll fly right into Santiago, and on our first day we'll arrive probably in the afternoon. We'll have to connect through a gateway city in Europe, because there's no flights directly into Santiago de Compostela. It's a relatively small airport. And when we arrive in the afternoon, at that point, we'll all have a little bit of jet lag. So there'll be some free time for us to explore a little bit of the city on its own. The city center is very historic and it's very compact. So you can wander around the streets and get your first impressions of this magnificent city. There's all kinds of narrow little alleys and nooks and crannies. Most people gravitate and end up heading to the cathedral, which you see in the picture here. It is really the landmark, the picture postcard of Santiago de Compostela. Of course, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. We're going to be spending 4 nights here in Santiago. And so after we spend the first night, we'll have a nice welcome dinner. And the following day, we'll have a walking tour that takes in the old town, the UNESCO designated parts of Santiago de Compostela. Perhaps along the way, we'll try some chocolate churros, which are these delicious Spanish pastries that are famously come from this region. We'll have some time, of course, on your own. I try to allow a lot of time for one to explore so that you're not being pushed from one place to the next. And maybe you'll head over to the visit Museo de Peregrin. I can hardly pronounce it myself. Peregrinaciones, which is the Museum of the Pilgrims. Of course, Santiago de Compostela is all about pilgrims, and it's the end of the famous Camino de Santiago, which is known in English. Sometimes it's referred to as the Way of St. James, but I think most of us, certainly I have always referred to it as the Camino de Santiago, and that's really what put the city of Santiago on the map. And just to tell you a little bit about the Camino de Santiago, this is a hiking trail. It's a pilgrimage that starts way in actual fact on the French side of the French-Spanish border, out in the Pyrenees, and the entire route is about 800 kilometers long. There's actually more than one route, though. The most famous one is the one that starts on the Spanish-French border, but there are other ways. The point being that they all culminate in Santiago de Compostela, and along the way you see this scallop symbol. And there's a whole bunch of stories as to why it is a symbol of the scallops. Probably has something to do with the fact that that Santiago is close to the Atlantic coast, and of course there's a lot of seafood there. But in any event, the people going on this pilgrimage will often wear the scallop as a symbol that they are pilgrims going from one village to another. It's quite an amazing experience. In fact, over the last 20 years, the number of people who've walked this trail has increased to something over 300,000 people who did it last year. If you did the whole route, it would take you a whole month. If you walk 25 kilometers a day, I actually know somebody that walked for an entire month and did the entire route, and they said it was one of the most life-changing experiences they ever did. If you do complete it, or if you complete at least 100 kilometers of it, you get a special certificate to say that you have successfully done the Camino de Santiago. So a lot of history there, and as I say, it all culminates at the cathedral in Santiago. So the following day, we'll make a trip out to visit Cambados, which is about an hour's drive southwest on the coast. And Cambados has some amazing ancient monuments and palaces, it's perhaps its most famous claim to fame in this day and age is all about a white wine which they call Albarino. In Portugal, they call it alvarino. In Spanish, they call it albarino. And it's a sort of a fruity flavored wine, kind of like a Gewürztraminer or a Viognier. And it really got started, it got popular in the last 20 years, so much so that they actually started growing the grape over in California. So while we're in Cambados, we'll have a chance to taste some of this delicious wine. We'll also go out on a boat ride to see the bateas, which are these floating platforms that they use to harvest shellfish. This is a practice that's been going on for probably a couple of hundred years. So it's fascinating to see how they collect the mussels and the scallops and so on these bateas. And of course, we'll get a chance to taste those as well. Our next day in Spain, while we're in Santiago, is a day at leisure. And so on this program, much like many of the programs that we do, I believe including at least a full day where you can undergo things on your own. Now, does that mean we're going to leave you completely alone? No, quite the contrary. What we do is try to understand what group or groups of people from within our group would like to do, and then I organize little outings. So what I'll probably do with some of the group, depending on what the interest level is go out to Cape Finisterre, which is known in Roman times as the end of the earth. It's a spectacular peninsula. And as I say, this is a coastal program. So the viewpoint here with this very rugged coastline of Galicia in northern Spain and its lighthouse has an amazing sunset. So if we can organize it right, and in fact, we will organize it right because I'm a big believer in sunsets, we'll head out to Cape Finisterre for the afternoon, take in the glorious sunset, and come back to Santiago in the evening. Then, so that will culminate our 4 nights in Santiago. From there, we head south and we head towards Porto and the Douro River Valley, which of course is one of the many highlights on this trip. The Douro River is perhaps known to many of you. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And of course is famous for the grapes that they use to produce Portuguese wine and the famous port wine. Of course, on the way down there, we're going to stop in Vigo, which is a busy little fishing village. In fact, it has the largest fleet of fishing vessels anywhere in Europe. So it's quite a sight to see all these vessels that are going out fishing for cod and all the other fish that they harvest here in the North Atlantic. Lunch will be at leisure. Probably we're going to stop for some seafood. And I do recommend trying the pulpo gallego, which is the local octopus. And if you haven't tried octopus before, it takes a little bit sometimes to get over the look of it, but it really is quite delicious, and it is quite a specialty here in Galicia, in northern Spain. That is going to be our last stop in Spain, and by the evening we'll arrive in Porto, which of course is at the mouth of the Douro River. And in the last few years, it's really turned into one of the most popular travel destinations in Portugal, if not in all of Europe, and for very good reason. It's a beautiful, beautiful city. It's I think it's probably the most picturesque of the cities that we'll visit on our trip, and we'll spend again 4 nights in Porto. The first full day we will again do a walking tour, mostly a walking tour. We'll probably use some of the funiculars. As you can see, it's on quite a steep hill, but we'll look at Porto from different angles. We'll take in this the Dom Louis the First bridge, which is this steel, this iron bridge that spans one side of the city to the other. Perhaps we'll even have a chance to go on the cable car ride. So yeah, there we go. So Joel is advancing the slides for me, so we're we're just one behind. Porto, of course, is all about port wine, and port wine is grown. The grapes are grown, of course, out in the Douro River Valley. But some of the famous port wine makers, like you've probably heard of Taylor Fladgate or Graham's. There's many, many of them. They have their base right here in Porto. And so for those of you who don't know too much about port wine, you've probably sampled it before. And we're going to learn a lot more while we're there in Portugal. But there is roughly 8 styles of fortified wines or wines like port. You probably or have either heard of or tried sherry or Madeira or vermouth, Marsala. These are all fortified wines, of which port is arguably the most famous. And port itself is made from fermenting grapes, just as you would to make ordinary wine. But they stop the fermentation process a little bit early, and they add this special Portuguese distillate or spirit called aguardiente, which they also drink straight. I'll tell you more about that later. And by stopping the fermentation process, you get that very distinctive flavor of port. And depending on the grape variety and the aging, you get these different styles that you can see listed here. Everything from the ruby ports, which are the less expensive variety, all the way up to these vintage ports, some of which could be 80, 100 years old. And so port wine will undoubtedly be served from time to time as we sample the delicious cuisine of Portugal. So after we spend a day in Porto itself, we're going to then head out on the Douro River, out into the beautiful rolling hills of the Douro Valley. The countryside is more spectacular than pictures even do justice. We'll head out towards Regoa, which is the epicenter of the port wine production, where the grapes are actually grown. We'll have lunch there, and then we'll jump on a boat and actually sail down a little bit of what I think is the prettiest part of the Douro River at a town called Pinhão. The banks are steep and terraced, again, just like it's shown in the picture. It is one of these places in the world that will, I think, remain etched in your mind once you've had a chance to visit the Douro Valley. The whole region is, as I mentioned before, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It bills itself as the oldest wine region in the world, but we have another destination, and we'll talk about another time, in Georgia, which actually has grapes that are a little bit older. But then when we're talking thousands of years, who really cares? It's an old place. And it is one that's quite amazing. So our next day in Porto, consistent with the theme of having free time, is a day at leisure. I suspect most people will probably want to stick around in town and wander these narrow streets themselves, and perhaps take that cable car ride if we don't get a chance to do it on our organized tour. There's so many things to do in town. But for those that are a little bit more adventurous, we might go a bit further afield. There's some very cool salt flats in Aveira, which is about an hour's train ride to the south. So that's something that we could do. We could also go down to Espinho, which is much closer, has some beautiful beaches, some more amazing coastline, and terrific seafood. So we have a full day there to take in this wonderful part of northern Portugal. We'll then head down the next day, heading further south to Coimbra. And what I like about this tour, I say that because I put it together myself, but what I like about this tour is that we're visiting places that are often off the beaten track for the normal sightseeing tours. And Coimbra is one of those places. It's about an hour and a half south. It's going to be our first stop on the way. It's a medieval city. It's actually a university town, and it is the oldest university in Portugal and one of, if not the oldest, in all of Europe. So walking through the halls of this university is literally like walking through a Harry Potter movie. So we'll take some time to explore these wonderful buildings belonging to the university, and the city itself, which sits on the riverfront, and it has this romantic essence to it that is truly fantastic. So we'll have lunch there before we then head out and make our way down to Lisbon, which is about another 2 hours further south, and we'll arrive in the latter part of the afternoon and have time to take in Portugal's capital. So here we are. Now we get to Lisbon. Lisbon, obviously the capital of Portugal, and again, a city that in the last 5 to 10 years, I remember the first time I went there compared to my most recent visit, the number of visitors has increased exponentially. But for good reason. Lisbon is truly an amazing city. You could spend a week just wandering the streets, taking in the museums, the castle. There's so many things to see there. Our first full day, we'll obviously have a guided tour of the major sites. We'll head down to Belém with the Belém Tower and the Hieronymus Monastery, two of the main sites in Lisbon. We'll then head back into the city center, Rossio Square, and as well as the main Parliament buildings. A few of the highlights. They also have a market there, which is someplace I always hit when I go to Lisbon, Mercado da Ribeira, where they have kiosks representing many of the restaurants from around the city. A fantastic experience, and definitely for any of the times when we have when there's a meal that's not included, I will. Oh, sorry, my lights seem to have gone out here. Automation for you. When I'll point out one of the restaurants that I've had luck in dining in the past. And Lisbon itself has quite an interesting history, because despite being so picturesque, you'd think it's like other European cities that have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. Well, of course, the city has, but it was totally destroyed by an earthquake barely 200 years ago. In fact, 85% of the buildings were completely destroyed. So most of what you see today is new by European standards. And that's part of what, when you think about in North America, our cities and our buildings and what was built 200 years ago, and we don't have much left over. In Lisbon, everything was built in that time period, and the city is truly amazing. It has a certain vibe to it that I find is different than a lot of the other cities that have become quite modern and bustling and very stressful. You still have people singing in the streets in Lisbon. You've got street artists. It's despite all of the tourism that has come there, you still have a very authentic feel to it. In the evening, we'll do a fado show, which is about as Portuguese as you can get in Portugal. It's Portuguese music, typically guitar type instruments that are played alongside dinner. A lot of fun and an experience that is not to be missed, and that's why it's going to be on our program. Then the next day in Lisbon, we will visit the world famous and the Penha, which sits up on top of a hill. For those of us that are energetic enough, we'll walk up to the palace. It is the recommended way to go, although it's a bit of a steep climb, but it's well worth it. Sintra is a must-see day trip from Lisbon, which we'll do. In the afternoon, then we're going to head out to the westernmost part of Europe. So for those of you who like to check boxes, I certainly do, and head out to Cabo da Roca, which has this amazing lighthouse. And again, you get a little bit of a sense of it here, but the view of the coastline is truly magnificent. And on the way back to Lisbon, we'll stop in a couple of seaside towns, either Cascais or Estoril, which is where the Lisboners will head out for the weekend because of the beautiful beaches. They're very close by the city itself. Of course, the next day on October the 11th, we have another full day at leisure. Because there's so much to see and do in Lisbon, I fully suspect that most people will probably want to stick close to the city center. You just can't get enough of it. However, if anybody is looking to do something further afield, again, there's a number of interesting places that are a short train or a bus ride away from the city, like Setúbal, where you can spot dolphins, perhaps, or they're known for their pink flamingos. There's also a little town called Óbidos, which is a little bit in the inland, that has amazing cobblestone streets and a medieval castle. So if you're somebody that just can't get enough of the castles, then that would be the trip for you. Whatever you decide, the whole point is that I will help you see what it is that you want to see on your free day in Lisbon. And then we make the next leg of our journey. After checking out, we head due east about an hour and a half to the city of Évora. And Évora is in the middle of the so-called Alentejo, region of Portugal. And this isn't, again, everybody, or many people have heard of Lisbon and people have heard of the Algarve, but Alentejo is this region that is sort of between Lisbon and the Spanish border and between Algarve and Lisbon. I love the region, frankly, myself, because that's where I think the best of Portuguese wines come from. Evora itself is like a museum in and of itself. It's got Roman ruins. It's got these beautiful colorful buildings. And the coolest thing about it all, though, is the Chapel of Bones. And so it's a bit morbid for some people, I admit that, but it's very, very fascinating. It took 5,000 bodies to gather all of the bones that adorn this chapel. It is, as I say, it's perhaps not for everyone. I think it is truly a marvel. And don't ask me exactly how they got all those bones or why. Anyway, it's neither here nor there. We'll find out the whole story when we visit Evora. And after our visit there, we'll head south on probably the longest single leg of our journey, about 2.5 hours through the rolling hills of Alentejo before we end up in the Algarve, where we'll check into our hotel in the city of Albufeira. And our first full day touring around the Algarve, we'll visit Faro, which is the capital of that region. We'll stop in again at the cathedral, and believe me, this is not one of those ABC tours. The main reason for going to the cathedral is because the bell tower affords us some terrific views over the city and over the seaside. So it's quite beautiful. In the afternoon of that day, we'll stop in at Lule, where they have a really unique covered market. And given that this is the last leg of the trip, this is the time to do the souvenir shopping because you'll find some great things there in the market at Lule. The next day, we have our last full day of guided touring on the trip. We'll visit Lagos and Segres, and here is where we'll see the Algarve coastline that you've probably seen before in pictures and postcards. So a little bit about the Algarve itself. Perhaps you've visited it before, you know somebody that's been there. It's Portugal's most well-known beach destination. Sometimes it takes a sort of how should we say, falls second place to the Costa del Sol in Spain. But at the same time, I think it is truly magnificent because it has these amazing white sand beaches and this dramatic sort of craggy rock coastline. I mean, we see this in the northern part of Spain, but here in the Algarve, it is truly the most pronounced. People come from all over Europe into this region, particularly in the summer months when it's truly overrun with summer beach tourists flocking here. But the weather is really nice from April all the way into November. So the time that we're going in October is kind of an optimal time without all the crowds. In fact, the water itself is still swimmable. It's 20 to 22 degrees. Joel, we can just flip over to the next slide there. So if you feel so inclined, it's one of the places where you can actually take a dip in the ocean and it's quite bearable. Beyond the amazing scenery, of course, because it's a seaside area, the seafood is amazing. Is quite good. In particular, bacalhau. You may have heard it before, which is basically cod. It's a Portuguese way that they make cod, and it's truly delicious. And the nice thing about the Algarve and this region, Albufeira, is that you have very modestly priced restaurants, everything up to some of the best Michelin star restaurants in all of Portugal. And one other interesting point about the Algarve is that not that long ago, the Portuguese government built an artificial reef using old warships just offshore. It's one of these reef regeneration projects that they've done. And in fact, it's now the largest one in the world. So if you happen to be a diver on your free day, you can actually go and you can do dives down at this massive artificial reef that they've built. Our last day, of course, in the Algarve, appropriately at leisure, many things to do. It might be nothing other than just taking a walk along the beautiful beaches. We might otherwise go inland to a town called Silves, which is a city all in orange, and they have this Moorish castle that sits on the top of the hill. But as I say, I fully suspect one might just wander along these spectacular beaches that the Algarve is so well known for. Albufeira is the largest city in the Algarve region. If it was July or August, I probably might say, it might be too busy to go there. But in October, it quiets down, and it's a great place to round out our adventure on the Atlantic coast of Spain and Portugal. So that will finish off our trip. The final day, October the 16th, we'll fly back from Faro, and we'll have to connect again, probably in Munich or one of the other cities to get back to Canada, depending on where it is that you're coming from. So a little bit about the details. Again, the program is running from September the 29th until October the 16th of this year. And in total, it's 16 nights. So we have 4 nights in each of Santiago, Porto, Lisbon, and Albufeira. It's $67.80 Canadian per person based on double occupancy. All of the details are in the itinerary. If you didn't already click on the e-magazine that's on our website. But that does include quite a bit. It's the airfare is included, all of the ground transportation is included, 2 meals a day on all of the days where we have our organized touring, certainly breakfast every day, all of our guides, gratuities, of course my services as your host. So it's quite a comprehensive program, and I think it represents great value. Of course, the only thing that is not included is trip cancellation insurance. If you're that price, by the way, was based on a Toronto departure, but we can organize that from anywhere in Canada, and any other meals or beverages that I didn't mention are what's excluded from the program. So if you have any questions at all, before I'm just about to get to the questions, because I do see that a few questions have come in. Yeah, if you have any questions that we don't address today, please send either me an email or to Cassandra, and we will certainly get back to you. So without further ado, let's go and answer some of the questions, and we'll start off first of all with Robert, who asks if the renovations on the cathedral are finished. I'm assuming you mean the cathedral in Santiago de Compostela, and no, they are not finished. They started those renovations about 4 or 5 years back, and they are due to totally complete them sometime in the latter part of 2020. So, I mean, they take care so that it's not like the whole museum is, the whole cathedral is under scaffolding, but there will be part of it that will be under renovation while we're there. It doesn't detract for the overall impression, but I've yet to see a cathedral in Europe that doesn't have some renovation going on. This is always one of the challenges. A couple other questions. We had an email question come in from Stephanie, who asked about airport transfers. Yes, all of our ground transportation is included, including the transfers both on arrival and on departure. Stephanie also asked about Bilbao and San Sebastian and whether they're close enough for a day trip on the free day. No, they aren't close enough, Stephanie. If you're interested in, and I have been to San Sebastian, Bilbao, of course, famous for the Guggenheim Museum, they are a little bit too far afield. I would recommend coming in a few days earlier. You could fly into Bilbao and do San Sebastian as a day trip from there if you wanted to see those places. Let's see a couple other questions. I don't think I'll try to get to them all. Donna asked if you have to take the group flights. No, we try to be very flexible with the transportation. So if you do wish to arrive earlier, so for example, you like Stephanie, you want to see Bilbao or San Sebastian, or if you want to go to Madrid, you can we can arrange the flights however it is that you like. So you don't have to take the group flights. We're happy to facilitate it, or simply give you a credit if you want to make your own airfare arrangements. And Doreen asks, can we do our own thing on the sightseeing days? So if you mean the days where we've already got sightseeing organized, yeah, you can do your own thing on any of the days. So it's not just restricted to the days, the free days. I've hosted tours before where somebody said, okay, well, we're going here, and somebody said, no, I want to go and see this. The whole point of it, of the way I like to run programs is that even though you're on a group tour, I try to facilitate that you can do a little bit of your own thing, and I do my utmost to make sure that you see what you want to see. So you're not obligated to do anything other than to go from one place to the next. There we have to take you with us. Brenda asks if I know what the temperature range might be. Yeah, the temperature range this time of the year is still quite nice. You can get some breezes off the Atlantic for sure, which could make it a little bit cooler. But I would say on average, the temperature will range from about, on the cool side, 15 degrees during the day. On the warm side, it could be as warm as in the mid-20s. And so the temperature is quite lovely. The evenings could drop down, but it would be unlikely that the temperature would fall below 10 degrees. So it's part of the reason I picked mid-October, because it's an optimal time of the year to visit this part of the world. Let me see. Do we have any other questions? No, I think that is it. I think we've answered all of the questions. But again, if you do have any other specific questions to your own travel plans that you would like, by all means, drop us an email. Either myself, Cassandra, would be more than happy to answer those questions. And just see if I've got anything else. No, I think that's it. So on that note, I thank you all very much for participating in our webinar. I hope you found that interesting and informative, and I would love to meet you on this program, or if not, at one of the many upcoming events that we have in the next several weeks. I think there's 20 of them scheduled. So have yourselves a wonderful evening. Thank you again for joining. And as I like to say, happy travels.